Welcome back to the Manaburnt podcast. This is a bit of a special episode today. We've got our friend Jon Gibbons here today to talk about a game that he's worked on called The After.
That's right.
It's an RPG supplement for the Savage World system, and it looks very interesting. So I think straight over to you, Jon. What is the game and who are you?
Okay. So my name's Jon. I'm a freelance illustrator in the RPG industry. I've been illustrating for probably close to about 15 years now, but seriously in the past sort of 5 years. As well as an illustrator, I'm obviously an avid gamer myself, into role-playing games. So I'm always looking for interesting concepts and new games to get involved with. And a few years ago, I came up with a concept for a post-apocalyptic setting as such, but with a little bit of a twist rather than your usual kind of deserty Mad Max style or your radioactive mutant wasteland style of, PA games. I wanted something a bit different. So I came up with a concept called The After, which is basically, in a nutshell, a post-apocalyptic setting based in the north west area of America, in Wyoming, in fact. And it's set about a century after a alien invasion, where aliens made contact with mankind due to the fact that mankind sort of started advertising themselves by beaming messages into space like we do,
Yep.
Aliens turned up, but unfortunately they were not of the friendly type, and it was basically a complete massacre. So the Earth was hit by this level of technological destruction that no one could compete with.
Yeah.
As if that wasn't bad enough. After this war was raging for about 20 years, another alien race turns up, and this alien race were the natural enemies of the first alien race. And you could say they've got a lot of history, and they then started their own kind of solar system-wide war between each other. In the meantime, mankind's just thought of ants and just ignored in general. But the damage, the destruction brought to the Earth and the solar system by these two warring parties brought on this apocalyptic feel, if you could say, for the game. And then suddenly, after a century, the war's over. Both alien races disappear, go off, do whatever they're doing. And the survivors of this are now coming forth back into the world, going, okay, what's left and what can we do to live here?
Okay.
That's the basic concept of it.
Yeah. I mean, I've had a look at the quick start guide, which people can find right now. I'll leave a link for it in the description. But yeah, just that backstory of the 1-2 punch of alien invasions there. It sounds like it was quite devastating. So it's quite an interesting background for a post-apocalypse setting. There's no nuclear devastation or anything like that.
Yeah, precisely. And I think it's something that's not really been touched on before. So you do generally tend to find that most of these settings tend to be based around World War III or a zombie apocalypse or something on those lines. But it was... I wanted something that was going to cause the mass devastation, but was a bit different. So that's why we thought up of this alien race. And then it was a way of then trying to make it a little bit different for people then surviving in the new world as they come forth from wherever they've been hiding out or their families have.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what we decided was that because we still wanted to have the uniqueness of people having mutations or people having and developed unusual abilities. So we basically said, well, the first alien race, which are known as the Butchers to the survivors, they were kind of like your typical genetically modified meat grinder type species that just were interested in just harvesting humankind, and it was called the Harvest. That's the first part of the war. So with their kind of like genetic changes they made to the makeup of man, that brought on sort of mutations, not just in people but also animal and plant life, known as the Changed, as it's called in the book.
Okay.
While the second race that turned up, the enemy of the Butchers, they were a dimensional traveling species. Very different to the Butcher, almost ethereal in their outlook and the way they are. And they travel for the dimension using their technologies. So when they turned up, what they left behind and the remnants of technology they've left behind and the way that their technology worked and changed things, you've got these pockets called breaches within the world, where almost kind of like where the dimensions have been opened and not quite closed. You've got pocket dimensions that have appeared across the landscape. So you literally might find a valley that's a frozen tundra because there might be a small, minute portal to a frozen world still there, or a place that's perpetually dark, or a place which is overrun by exotic, unusual creatures and plant life. So lots of good places to explore as survivors.
Yeah, interesting. I can see how what you've done there is you've made a post-apocalypse setting that has all the typical things you want from a post-apocalypse of survival and things like that, but there's a lot of potential there for strange environments and encounters to happen.
Oh, sorry. There is something actually that I really liked about that, and this is hard for me to say because I'm not the biggest fan of post-apocalyptic stuff. I think everyone knows this by now. I think it's just probably an apprehension towards the subject because, in my opinion, it's just been overexploited, and like you said, everything is pretty much Mad Max like or close enough, and it is cool once, maybe twice, but the constant grind of it just drives me a bit nuts, particularly because in recent years post-apocalyptic also usually means some form of zombie invasion, and it just feels really, really dull to me. So I will admit that when I was actually looking through the book, I was very skeptical because I was like apocalypses and zombies and stuff, is this what I'm going to find? But I actually found myself looking through it thinking, it's really just a pretense more than anything else. The apocalypse has happened, but this game is really just about, there is a very big element about exploring and sort of living a hard life to the best way you can. And to me, that is the most appealing aspect of the game. It does actually have a very high degree of involvement from the point of view of the player, or at least it appears to me to be that way. And those never endless opportunities for exploring and finding out whatever weirdness could still be out there. I think that's actually the point, at least to me, that makes this game so exciting, because it's not just a survival game. It's not just a apocalyptic future.
Yeah, it's the thing as well is the fact that most post-apocalyptic games revolve around you finding food, finding clean, unradiated water, all that kind of stuff. Yeah. That's not an issue because it's not a war, a third world war that set nuclear bombs everywhere, so everywhere is an irradiated wasteland. It's not. It's set in Wyoming, which is a beautiful part of the world. I chose Wyoming because it's, out of all the American states, I think it's the most leastly populated. So in my mind, I thought, well, it's the least populated, which means that it probably had the least physical attention by the alien invaders.
Yeah.
So you've still, don't get me wrong, if you were to go to the major cities in this world, which we don't touch on in the setting, you probably would find irradiated waste piles and whatever. But here, you've still got the lush mountains and forests, the snowy weather, the plains of grassland. You've still got the bison wandering across the plain, although things might be changed slightly. So the search for food and water is not an issue. Everyone's going to have basic survival abilities. It's like it's almost going to be like, the way I put it is, it's kind of like a frontier mentality.
Yeah.
So it's not Wild West. When we first started developing the game, unfortunately, a lot of people started inferring it was a bit Wild West-like, and it's not. It's more kind of like The Revenant or Jeremiah Johnson.
Yeah.
So, that kind of like pre-industrial log cabin, people out there in searching for food and water by just fishing and doing whatever they need to do. That's not a problem. The uniqueness of it is dealing with the various factions that have come back into the world, finding your place in those factions, exploring, finding locations that have been affected by the war, coming across these unusual breaches, finding the remains of technology that you can find. We call these remnants, basically. And I suppose the best analogy for that is if you look at, say, games like Numenera.
Yep.
So in Numenera, you might find, I forgot what they're called now, ciphers in Numenera, yes. I believe. So you find these unusual objects that no one really knows what they were used for, but they have abilities. Well, it's a very similar thing with the remnants in the After. You may come across butcher remnants. Now, they're going to be more genetic-based objects that will graft themselves to your skin, start to change you. It might be a strange eye that will actually fasten itself, remove your eye, and suddenly you've got this unusual eye that enables you to see at night, but it will have something else negative that will affect you.
Scary.
While the ghost remnants are more dimensional, ethereal, psionic-based, strange devices. We have one that's kind of like a crystal, and when you pick it up and touch it, it produces a illusion of a deceased loved one. Things like that. So just strange devices, but they're there to be found by the players. So and exploring these unusual breach zones will harvest these remnants in a way.
Yeah, I can see there's a lot of potential there, and as you were saying earlier about just the locale and the location. Obviously, you've done all the art for the game, haven't you? So looking at some of the art, which I'll put up on the YouTube video that this is on, you can see it looks very lush and green, just with a little bit of devastation here and there in the wild areas.
But it is a wonderful
nice
contrast, actually. I mean, we were before we actually started recording, Jon and I were just having a little nerd about art and stuff like that. And I think it's actually a lot of these games kind of just make you have this horrible setting around you, which, I get it. Everything is destroyed. Everything is trashed. Life is just essentially come to an end. But there is nothing wrong with actually having this vibrant world around an apocalypse. And it's it's something that I'm really happy that you've tried to put forward, because let's be frank, if the Earth was just about to go to war with an alien race and we were dead, or everything else around us would be destroyed, nature will still find its way. So there is no reason why we can have a destroyed setting with still these landscapes and this stuff around us. So it was another thing. I'm grateful that Alex has brought it forward as well, that it actually really shocked me, and to me is one of the things that actually sold the game, because I find it more inviting to play that way. I know this may sound really weird, but I think from the point of view of having to deal with a setting like this, post-apocalyptic stuff, to me it is very cold, just sort of thinking, oh, I am just gonna rummage through these dead wasteland where nothing ever changes. And I'm very sure a lot of people may find this appealing, but to me that just seems like a complete waste of time. I can do that every single day when I walk through the street. These days, I know that sounds really cruel, but people these days kind of just walk, sleepwalking, looking at phones and technologies. Is a different type of waste, if you see what I mean. It's a different setting, but it's the same concept. However, by having that encouragement of everything may have been lost, but there is those new opportunities here, you can still try and find that hope, maybe, or
there's quite a contrast there in the game, because with the harvest and the war between the two aliens, where it's just from the description, it sounds relentless, just like humans were little more than animals to these aliens, and just completely getting devastated. And then after they're gone, after all that horrific war, there's a little bit of hope there, because especially with the tagline of the game, the war is over, the enemy has gone, reclaim the Earth. So there's a little tiny bit of hope there. And
yeah, absolutely. And I think don't get me wrong. I mean, the idea is that people who run this setting, I'm sure they will run it how their group wants to. So there's obviously going to be the opportunity. People want to run a very, we're fighting the Raiders, kind of like Mad Max style. It could be done. It could be done.
Yeah.
But for example, what we're trying to do is include in the book a quite in-depth gazetteer for the area, Wind River, which is the area in Wyoming where it's set.
Mm-hmm.
And the main starting place is a settlement called Chapter, and Chapter itself was formed by survivors on the outbreak of the war from the local university, mostly young people and teachers. They fled to the mountains. They fled to the Wind River mountain range, and they took with them a large amount of physical books from their university library. And they set up within the mines, rode out the war by just, it would not have been a pleasant experience riding out the war, as you can imagine, living in these mines while, this war's being fought on the surface. But then the community's now come out. It's now about 20 years after it's been formed. So you've got this frontier community. They're trying to be as civilized as they can. They've got this library from 100 years ago, and there's lots of hope there. It's a hopeful place. And yeah, the DM could very easily say, no, I'm not going to use that. You wander off and you're going to go and do your own thing. But I'd like people to use Chapter as their base and be constructive and help build Chapter into more a hopeful place for the area.
Yeah, no, I'm like, again, this generally was a selling point for me. I know I keep on saying that, but it's seriously, it's really, really difficult for me to, appreciate or have any type of sympathy for this type of setting. So the fact that you've actually been able to do that, to me, it meant so much, because, well, this was a genre that for me, it was simply just not something I could explore, because no one was giving me that chance to actually try the alternative. So by providing the alternative, it's actually, it's really exciting. And I think this is something that is really important nowadays in the game community, particularly in the world of RPGs, because I mean, you know this, Jon, better than anybody, because you are involved in many projects, but we pretty much have an RPG every millisecond these days. So finding something that makes it unique and a little bit exciting, it is difficult, or it can be difficult. And I mean, I'm not saying everyone has to reinvent the wheel. That is difficult, and I appreciate that. But yeah, finding that twist and actually open it up to new players that perhaps you wouldn't normally have is a very important marketing strategy for any creator out there. And I think maybe, I don't know if it was something intentional that you did was trying to come up with the concept or not, but it certainly has been, I think, or it will certainly be the result of this. But I know that sometimes these decisions come out of the blue, and it's not necessarily what you hoped for or what you intended, but it's still something to take.
And I think, I mean, the concept of the setting itself originally stemmed from, I mean, I've got a love of the wilderness and nature myself. That's a big thing in my life, and I'm also a big Western fan and all that kind of stuff. So I do love that area and parts of America which are like that. There's a fantastic film actually on Netflix called Wind River. I don't know if you've had a chance to catch it. It's got the guy who played Hawkeye in the Avengers. What's his name?
I can't remember his name, but yes, Hawkeye. There you go.
Hawkeye. It's set in modern day, and it's actually called Wind River. And it's actually set in this same area. And it was quite scary because the film came out well after we'd come up with the concept and started. But when I watched the film, it was really interesting because I could visualize, what was happening and imagine what it would be like, in the game. So It's really, you should check that out if you can. It's a really good film, a nice film.
I do like if there's a game or something I've been playing, I do like trying to find films or TV shows that are a bit similar.
Absolutely. Things. Yeah, I mean, it's a really lovely film, beautifully filmed, fantastic music. It's a really good film. But the concept for the After was born mostly from illustrations. So basically, I was just doing some illustrations, and then my mind starts wandering, and you start in my spare time doing more illustrations around the theme, and then things sort of come to light. I did a recent project called Extreme Earth for Fainting Goat Games. Let's say recent, I think it was about 3 years ago now. And that was a similar thing where, as the artist, I came up with a concept, and then I approached Mike at Fainting Goat Games. And then I said to Mike, look, I've got this project I want to get. I've got this world I want to create. Here's some artwork. What do you think? He said, yeah, it looks great. It looks interesting. And then we found a writer. And then it grew from there. And then that went to a Kickstarter, and it was very successful. And even today, people are still buying it. It was great.
Nice.
And that's the same way that I've done with the After. I came up with the artwork, I've come up with the concept, approached Mike. Mike was interested. We found a great writer, a chap called Sean Noakes, who's very knowledgeable of the Savage Worlds system. Because we decided to use Savage Worlds, which I think was quite a key decision, basically because Savage World is very much around heroic role playing. I think, it's not I can't explain it. It's not like a gritty, grim setting. It can be used for almost any setting. So we decided to use Savage World, and also the fact it's got a big fan base. Maybe foolish not to. You've always got to look at the numbers. So that's the way we proceeded. And then it's been 3 years in the making, and we're hopefully going to go to Kickstarter. I think the 22nd of May is the date we're going to launch.
Okay, great.
Yeah, it's coming up soon.
It is. I know. Lots of sleepless nights, and I'm staring at my Wacom tablet, going, "Oh my god, I've got so much more to do."
People should keep an eye out for that. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. This is pretty much the warm-up campaign, the pre-Kickstarted campaign.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's also one of the reasons why we wanted to do this. And actually, on that note, I'm really, really happy that you mentioned about Savage Worlds, because I think it could just be me because of my background, but the vast majority of the people I know, as soon as they think of Savage Worlds, they would think of the setting for superheroes that they had. And it's something that I was actually really curious to see how it worked in your game, in the After, because you've already said, and obviously it's in the quick guide mentioned that people can develop these abilities or these strange things, and of course that's an intrinsic part of the system and some of the most successful brands that Savage Worlds have come up with. So I certainly think that was a very, very good choice. And like you said, Savage Worlds is, it kind of goes with the name. You expect things to be a bit, epic and whoa, how am I going to deal with this? But one of the things that I like of Savage Worlds as a general setting, and that I think really, really fits with what you're doing here, is the fact that as much as it makes things tough, because it's not an easy an easy start with Savage Worlds. I find it's not the sort of thing I would throw a newbie into, because they may just cry themselves to sleep. But I think it puts it in perspective, if that makes sense. It kind of gives you this basis of things are not going to necessarily be easy, and you're going to struggle, but the reward that you're going to get from this as a player, from the system itself, is going to be much more fulfilling than if you were running this on, I don't know, just say basic RPG or D&D in that regard, which are much more focused on the mechanics and, the sort of epicness for the sake of epicness, rather than, that sort of heroic with an ulterior purpose, which in this case is, survival, improvement, and of course, construction and leading of mankind into a different era. So I was wondering, did you have any other backups or any other systems that you toyed with before you set for Savage Worlds, or was that something that was like definite from the beginning?
Well, I definitely wanted to avoid any kind of system that was level based.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I didn't want to go down the Pathfinder or 3.5 or the D20 route. I didn't want to do that because although I do like level games myself, you very, very quickly you can become overpowered.
Yeah.
And then it was like, and I always wanted it to have that feel of whether you started the game last year or last week, you're not going to see huge changes in your character.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
You want it to feel dangerous.
Precisely. And I wanted it to be where if there are going to be changes, there'd be significant small changes. And of course, Savage Worlds has that, where you've got the various feats and the edges and hindrances, etc. So it was always high on the radar for the game to use. I mean, I did look at others. I mean, there's a great but little known system. Again, it's a superhero system called Supers.
Yes.
Walt Robillard, who's a good friend of mine, who's helped us out, and he's continued to help us out on this at the After project. Actually, I did some artwork for him for his Kickstarter, and I really like that game as a supers game. It's probably my favorite superhero genre system. And I used to be a big hero fan. I spent years and years, probably 25, 30 years ago, playing Champions back in the day,
Oh, nice.
But supers I like because of the unique way that you can use everything you've got to do something if you can justify it with the GM. And I like that. And I did think about supers. But then again, Mike spoke to me, and we did have to look at the numbers, and you've got to realize that you're here to make money, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Well,
you are here. It's a business. And more people enjoy, play, and buy Savage Worlds. And it was the natural thing to go for. The downside to it is because it's got such a huge fan base, Savage Worlds, you've got to be spot on. You've also got to offer something different. You can't just do a settings book for Savage World and just say, use all your Savage World rule sets. Here's just the world. You have to offer new edges, new hindrances. You have to.
Yeah, you need to make it your own.
You do. And if you don't, no one's going to be interested.
Yeah.
So that's the reason why we got Sean on board, who knows his Savage World stuff. So because I don't know Savage World that much, so I relied on Sean. And of course, then when Pinnacle turned around and said there was going to be a new edition, that sort of was like, oh my god, because we'd mostly done most of the rules and writing. So when that came out, it was like, oh, panic. And I know that, we were getting updates from Pinnacle to say, oh, we've now changed this. We've now changed this next week. We've now changed this. There's been lots of rewriting all the time. And that's still going on now, to tell you the truth. I mean, even though their Kickstarter's well finished.
Yeah, these things often take a year or two.
It is. Yeah. It's still going strong, those changes. But the exciting thing is the fact that, you've got the Savage Worlds Adventure Edition. That's new. There's not that many settings out there for it.
Yeah.
So we are going to be one of the first settings, which is why we did the jump starts. Pinnacle asked people if they were interested to put jump starts forward, and if they were accepted. There's negotiations going on in the background now where they're quite strict to make sure that anyone going to Kickstarter is not jumping the back of each other. Right. So there's almost kind of like a schedule that's being laid out as we speak for the publishers to say, you can do your Kickstarter now, you can do yours now. So there's all Makes that sense. Going on in the background. Yeah. So hopefully, because it's developed around the Adventure Edition, we'll have more people interested in backing it on the Kickstarter.
Nice.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think you will, not just because of well, I mean, it's good timing, really good timing.
Yeah.
But I think, like I said, from the point of view of the game that is offering something new and something that is pretty to look at. Because I know this sounds silly, but you know, there is such a thing as having an RPG book and wanting to play an RPG because it looks awesome.
Oh, of course.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
I mean, it's
The
much
art is a very
more
important part.
interesting.
Yeah.
Exactly. I think it's also one of the reasons why I've always sort of struggled a bit with D&D, because as much as there is art, the original books didn't really have much of it.
Oh, yeah.
If we remember, first edition and that sort of stuff, it could be a bit dry, and it's so easy to fall into the stereotypes, I guess.
Mm.
But when you have something, like the artwork you've been producing for this, at least in my opinion, stunning, it really helps you immerse as well as a player, because can create that idyllic Wyoming in your mind, and have the images there really help you also shape your own character, shape how you're going to do things, what you want to get out of this, how this world is affecting you.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, it's about how this world is affecting you and how you deal with it. And if you don't really, if you cannot put a face, a picture, an image to that world, it is difficult. And this is not the type of setting, like we were saying, where you can just have like a one shot and not be really invested. You're not going to get anything out of it because of those small changes that you were referring to, the nuances. So the fact that you've dedicated so much effort into the work that you've done here from a visual point of view, it's great. At least for a nerd like me who likes this stuff, I look at it and think, oh yeah, this is gonna be awesome. And if I die, I'm gonna die right here. And you know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong. I mean, we did have a quick chat before we went live, Lily, and we discussed like ArtStation, and don't get me wrong. I mean, when it comes down to artistic talent, there are unbelievable artists out there who I would just die to have an ounce of their talent. I'm my own worst critic. And I think the problem with this, the double-edged sword in a way, is the fact that because I'm an artist and I've come at this from the creative and artist point of view, you put your own pressure on yourself. So it's normally with an RPG book, you would have, say, the publisher would say, okay, we've got this concept, let's get a writer. So the writer writes the book. Then they say, okay, what art do we need? We need to make sure every 2 or 3 pages has an illustration. Okay. And you would get an art director. The art director would say, right, well, this page here, we want an illustration of this race, or this page here, we want an illustration of a thief climbing the wall to show the climb skill, or, that kind of stuff. And it gets laid out, and they have an art budget. And the art budget is set in stone, and they go out to find the artist. But because I'm the artist and the creator, I'm like, I'm putting more pressure on myself. So I'm going, I've got this great image I want to paint, and I put in the book. And really, if it was done by somebody else, they probably would say, we actually don't need a piece of art there, John, but I do it. So it's kind of like, if I actually worked out how much I was being paid, say, for example, for this, I would probably be on less than minimum wage for the amount of artwork I'm doing, compared to if someone would say, we've got an art budget of this and we're going to pay an artist for it. So it is a labor of love. It is.
Yeah.
And it has to be.
You can tell.
Yeah.
I do like the approach of going with art first, though. It seems to have I think brought some life to the setting there.
Yeah, I do. And I think a lot of it comes down to, it's like concept art. So it's like, you get these big budget films, and sometimes what they will do is they'll say, okay, we're going to make a film. Let's just say Thor, for example. Yeah. So they go, we're going to make the movie Thor. And they'll get some writers to start coming up with basic scripts. But they then go to these concept art companies and just say, off you go. And it's the artists that come up with the visuals and the idea of the film to make it what it is, and the art does lead the final project. And I think
definitely,
in the RPG industry, it's not really done that way. Probably, I think it's done the opposite way, which not necessarily be a bad thing, because people have budgets and constraints.
Yeah, I mean, mostly, an RPG is in everyone's head, but the having more art, I think, is only a good thing. I'd be happy if the book was more art than text. Really, I love looking at art.
Yeah, of course. Everyone likes pretty pictures in the books. We all do, don't we? Absolutely. Well, but it's also a fine line to make sure it's good art, because all it takes is, I've seen many books where you'll go through and you go, oh, look at that great picture. Look at that great picture. My God, what's that? And and you can tell they might have had. Oh, you can hear my dog barking upstairs now. Going but you have these people, these artists, and they'll do fantastic work, and the art director say, "Oh, we need filler. Let's go and buy some cheap stock art." And you can see it's just been shoehorned in there, and that can spoil a book, I think, very, very easily.
I think it's really important that more projects like this and like what you're doing, get ahead in the industry, because it's really heartbreaking, being a writer. And I know this from my own personal perspective of having these mental images of how you expect everything to look like and what you want everything to look like, but not being able to actually put it into that shape. And there's nothing worse than you trying to describe something and thinking it is epic, it's the coolest thing, my players are gonna die big time, and then they just completely be underwhelmed because the vision doesn't get across. So I do really hope that your project and what you're doing helps us all move forward in this new direction in RPGs that I think is very important.
Yeah, it is, and it's always nice to be on board with visual projects. And don't get me wrong, there are other publishers out there who do focus on art a lot, and that's great. And it really is, And it's just a shame that a lot of the small press companies, they're limited on budgets, and they have good writers, but they can't afford the artwork, and they can't afford to go out there and pay artists what they should be paid. So they go down other routes, and that can, that has a detrimental effect on the products. That's just my opinion, but I'm biased an artist, so
but your bias here is relevant, though, so it's fine.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Excellent. Well, on that note, and if I am allowed, I wanted to move the conversation a bit away from the project. And I actually wanted to have this moment for Jon to talk a bit more about his art and his experience, because I mean, like we were saying earlier, we've been stalking on for quite some time. We know his work, but I think there's always this issue when you're an artist of creating something and people sometimes misunderstanding it, or perhaps getting it in a different way, or putting meaning into it that you never intended. So I think it would be nice if you could just give us a bit more of a background as to how your experience as an artist and what actually made you go into games, because it's not necessarily a very competitive market, not something that you hear a lot of people make money from. So it's something that has to be driven by passion. So if you can tell us more about that passion and where that comes from, I think it would be really good.
So I think my story will probably be exactly the same as any other artist, and that's the old routine of when you were a child, always draw. I mean, I'm 49, so when I was growing up as a small child, you didn't have the level of technology and social media there is today as a distraction. You had TV, but you only had 3 TV channels. You had your movie. To go to, but basically for me it was reading and drawing. And at an early age I was obsessed with science fiction and fantasy, so I was always sort of sketching and copying, and that's where I started as a child. So I think the first drawings you do is, remember Asterix the Ball and things like that.
I love Asterix.
So I was obsessed with Asterix and Tintin when I was a small boy, and I used to copy pages and panels, and that's where I first started to kind of like put pencils and drawing. And in junior school, I remember I was about 6 or 7, and everyone has the old dinosaur project you've got to do. I was became like an encyclopedia of illustrations of dinosaurs. Always basically drawing as a child, but I never really took it on as a career. I went to college, I did A-level arts and that kind of stuff like people did, but I never went to university to pursue it. I went down the other routes of a career. So I was always drawing, but not on a professional level. And it was probably only about, I would probably say maybe about 16, 17 years ago. And I've always role-played since I was picked up the original copy of D&D when I was about 14. I've always gamed, and I've always had a small group of friends. And even today, every week we meet up And it's the same group of guys that have been gaming together for the past 32, 33 years.
That's really special.
Yeah,
lucky you.
Yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong. I mean, there's been some major arguments, as you can imagine.
It happens.
No holds barred when you know someone so well. But yeah, we've always done that. So I've always gamed. I've always really been into role-playing games. And when social media first started about 15 years ago, you had lots of forums, and there was one forum in particular which was called. It was a Mutants and Masterminds one. I can't think what it was called. The Atomic Think Tank. That was it. And it was basically a forum for Mutant and Masterminds. And there was one sub-chapter in there, which was artwork, and it was show us the pictures of your characters that you've done. And I started basically showing a few images here and there of my characters. And then it was a chap called Chuck Rice, who's another friend of mine. He's a writer. He's got his own company, Apocalyptic Games, but he worked for West End Games, and he's done quite a lot of RPG supplements. And he said to me, "Oh, I'm doing this book. Can you illustrate a few characters for me?" And I was like, "Yeah, no problem at all." And I think it was literally like maybe $10 an image or something like that, And I produced a few. He liked it. Then someone else approached me, and then slowly, due to the various networking channels you've got, that's how my freelance illustration career sort of started to launch itself. But it's a hard business. It's not my full-time job. I have a day job. I think most people in small press have a day job. I've got a day job, and I'm a freelance artist, so I couldn't probably afford, especially in this country at the moment, to be a full-time freelance RPG illustrator and still have enough money for my family and a house over my head. It's very difficult. I think if you're a young guy who's a single guy with not major commitments, you could probably get away with it. But for someone,
maybe I'll try
But someone who's got large financial commitments and family, etc., it's difficult. So I do need the day job, but over the past 5 years, I've put more and more work into the freelance to the extent where, I've got my 9 to 5 job, but then every weekend and at least a couple of nights of the week, I'm drawing. And the money that brings in pays for holidays and luxuries for the family. It's a nice thing to be able to do. Absolutely. But it's also tough because it's the extra hours you're putting in on top of what you normally do. But yeah, I'm quite fortunate that I can pick and choose a bit because I've got the financial stability of the day job. So I can be a bit more picky about what projects I take on and what I want to draw. I sometimes get offers from people saying, "Can you do this for me?" Or "I want 20 illustrations of this." And I think, no, I'd be bored out of my brains. I don't do that. So I'm quite lucky. I'm quite lucky like that.
Yes, it's got to capture imagination to.
Yeah, absolutely. And then what happens is I'll do the illustrations for people, but then of course I have my own ideas, such as the after, which come into my head, and then I can then take that to my own level and do that myself.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a tough business, but it's something which you've got to have a passion for, And I think if you ever lost the passion, then you couldn't be an artist.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, it's interesting to hear your background and how you got started because, I quite like to doodle a little bit, and definitely since playing RPGs more. Well, yeah.
Sorry, I just think it's funny that you say doodle a little bit.
Yeah, I draw things now and again, not much. But, definitely playing RPGs makes me do it a lot more because I want to draw my characters and things like that.
Absolutely.
But yeah, unlike you, I've just kept all the art to myself. So
well, actually,
you should share it.
Yeah, and that's not true. In fact, every single listener of this podcast knows very well that if they go to Manaburnt, they should be able to see at least some of your maps, because you've been doing quite a lot of work on that lately. So And of course, you also do other creative stuff like all of your woodworking and whatnot. So, it is something I envy of both of you. You have all of this amazing power to change the world.
Well, yeah. I mean, like, unlike John, I probably don't have as much of the imagination to come up with the interesting ideas. I just like to copy things and stuff like that. So, but you, Lily, you can come up with all the ideas in the world. So, maybe together it makes.
That's it. That's perfect partnership.
Yeah, well, this is how we roll. You see,
see, Billy, you get writing, and then come up with the concepts, and then there you go. Alex starts illustrating, and bing, get your Kickstarter going, and we're off.
Well, that is kind of. I mean, it is something that it's been on the works for some time now, and again, people that have been following us. And that know us know bits and bobs. We haven't really let much out because, simply.
Yeah, we've got a little game setting that's like among friends at the moment.
Yeah, we have been playtesting that now for over 2 years.
Oh,
It's pretty good, and it's moving forward. And in a way, when you say about you come with these ideas and you put them on paper and this is how you made your game, well, that is what I would like to do. But I can't do that. So I can understand the process, because that's essentially what happens in my head. And I know a lot of frustrated artists like myself, which ditch the color pens and decide to just stick with an ordinary pen because that's the best we got. Understand this. You have the visual images, and that's how you really want to put things across. But it's much harder to achieve that, by crafting a scene through words than by doing what you do, John, for example.
I know, but the same token, I envy writers. So it's like when I thought of the afterthought, can I do the writing as well? Should I dip my toe in and try and do some of the writing? But then that just strikes fear into my heart,
Yeah.
It is. So you know what I mean. So for example, Sean has been doing, as well as obviously writing the setting, he's also been doing some narrations and some short stories for the book as well.
Nice.
At the beginning of every chapter, we basically have like a page of a short story relative to that, and I'm reading some of those and I'm blown away by it, and that just spurs me on to do some more art. So, writers and the artists just work hand in hand, and I get jealous of good writers.
Yeah, me too. I can see, when I look at like Lily's writing and stuff. I can see the power in the written word, definitely as well.
Absolutely.
But I think that's the reason why I really think it's unfair that the industry is so dominated by people with the pen and paper rather than as a joint effort. So it's something that when I was really surprised when Mike said, "Hey, instead of talking to me, you should really talk to John because it's really his baby." And I was like, "Yeah, right." The artist is the one that's come up with this. Of course he is. He's the one that's got the idea. He's the one that's seen this world. He's made it in his mind. But it's not something that happens often. And I think it's perhaps more familiar for people that are used to comic books, because we had an entire movement in the 90s with Image and artist leading comic books. And when you were saying this thing about writing striking fear in your heart, I kind of thought of yourself as a sort of a British Todd McFarlane, trying crafting up Spawn, having this super cool idea about this guy, and then thinking, crap, what am I going to write to go with it? And he eventually gave up writing the comic books himself because, well, he decided he was better off just doing the artwork and letting the art lead the story. But I really, really wish we could, in the next few years, have an industry that is more balanced in that regards, and where essentially those collaborations between artists and writers are actually what are making the products. Because I genuinely think in the end we will be having better games and a better experience for everybody, not just the producers, but of course the consumers. But then here are my revolutionary ideas. So
Well, I can see it. I can see it going that way. You know, we say there's an RPG coming out every minute now, but yeah, there's so many with really good art.
yeah,
You know,
absolutely.
sometimes I buy the books just to look at the art.
Yeah,
and there's a huge influx of fantastic artists springing up in the Far East. You know, I mean,
yeah,
Right.
you know, places like the Philippines and Thailand, you know, they've got some amazing artists there. You know, you go onto ArtStation and you can tell by the name, the person's name, that, you know, where they come from, and you just think, God, you just see a lot of these guys and girls from that part of the world, and their artwork is, you know, unbelievable.
Mm.
You know, so, and I think again that's social media that's done that.
Yeah.
You know, that's the platform that's given the worldwide platform to allow people to sort of share ideas and draw and sort of upload their portfolio for people to see.
Yeah, and you know, John, it's interesting that you mentioned the Far East, and in terms of art and whatnot, because I was just about to ask you. Obviously, you're based in the UK, and you were saying that your inspiration, you know, when you were little, came from bande dessinée, from France and from Belgium.
Yeah.
And it is, I always find it really interesting the visual changes and the way we portray things across the Atlantic, you know, from the United States and from Europe. And I think there has been quite a shift lately. Like we've been, well, I've been following quite closely a couple of RPGs that are actually from Sweden, and I've never seen artwork like it. You know, these are the Truth Bank Chronicles and Symbaroum. And Mike, a few weeks back, was telling us about these RPGs. And one thing that strikes me, and that actually has something in common with what you're doing, is that dragging to nature and giving nature a different perspective that is just not, you know, like a panoramic photograph.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's bringing that sort of flavor back into the story, and I wonder if maybe, I don't know if it's something that you've noticed, it belongs to certain parts of the world or the country a bit more than others, and maybe something that influences how these things have been cropping up. But yeah, I was kind of curious to see what your point of view was on that, because obviously, you know, you experienced it firsthand. So
Well, I think a lot of it comes down to the culture. So, you know, when you look at the Far Eastern cultures, they've always been very in depth around their mythology and you know the aspects of that. When you look at the artwork going back for the ages and the way the illustrated arts and around mythological beasts and sort of the fantasy genre, and you definitely see from the Far East some beautiful, elaborate, mythological beast illustrations. I always find it. Yeah. And I know what you mean when you're talking about some of these RPGs springing up from Northern Europe and France as well as doing a couple. There was there's one recently. I think it might still be going. Was it called Gods or it's on Kickstarter?
Yes, Gods. Yes, it's going on Kickstarter. That's
Gods
it.
now. Yeah, that's right. Now, is it French or German? I can't remember what it is now. It could be French.
I think it's a collaboration actually, but you know, don't quote me on that one. But yes, no, I think you're right.
And you can see again the style of the art is very different. It's the best. It's almost kind of like I'm going to say again, concept artist. So basically, most American products tend to be set in stone the way they illustrate things. You know, it's very character based, very creature based.
Yeah.
But then you tend to find that some of the European artists and some of the Far Eastern artists as well, they have beautiful concept environmental pictures. So you see lovely, unbelievable environments that have been illustrated that are just fantastic to look at.
Yeah, I love that approach.
Yeah, I do, and I love concept art. I mean, my bookshelf next to me now is just filled with concept art books from films. You know, if I see a good film, the first thing I do is go on Amazon and say, right, is there the book of the film artwork?
Yep.
You know?
Yeah, I have a few as well.
It's all concept art, you know, and you know, I think concept art for films is now starting to break through into other things. So it's starting to reach out into games. Let's face it. I mean, video games, the money that's been made there. This year, I think they said that video games have made more than the film companies combined for the last 30 years or something.
Yeah.
And
it's insane.
95% of concept art is done for the video game industry.
Yeah.
You've got these artists now who are being fed on that and being trained as concept artists, whether it's self-taught or going to concept art schools. So that's starting to drift into your role-playing market. So now you're seeing these more unusual illustrations that are a bit more different to what you would normally see.
Yeah, I like it. That's where, the little bit of drawing that I do, that's where a lot of my inspiration comes from, just looking at concept art for hours of like some of my favorite video games and stuff. I love that stuff.
Absolutely.
And, I wasn't a huge fan of the Hobbit films, but I've got all their concept art books for it because that's better than the actual end product itself.
And it's crazy. And the thing about a concept artist is it's kind of like it's a very much an unappreciated job, really.
Yeah.
Because I mean, I've got one next to me now, which was the art of the God of War video games.
Oh yeah,
that's really good.
So I've got the art book here, which I recently bought, and you look through it, and there's about 20 pages of just variants of costumes being worn by the societies that you might meet in the God of War. Now, that might be a small little thing that if you're playing the game, you probably wouldn't even be that much aware of. But there's been a team of artists who's probably spent weeks and weeks drawing elaborate costumes and illustrations of races and the culture and the buildings, and they'll never be seen. They're just on walls in the concept art studios, or it's a 10 seconds of video clip in the video game.
Yeah, it's a real shame because you do see with video games, you occasionally get like in a special edition they give you an art book with it, but oftentimes, like if I see a game that's got a great art style that I like, I go looking for the concept art just because I love that sort of thing. But I can't find it anywhere. They don't even want to sell it to me. Like I'd happily buy more art books of concept art.
And where are they? And where are these illustrations?
Yeah, they just get forgotten about.
Yeah,
absolutely. It is sad, really, but that's where the great thing of having things like ArtStation and DeviantArt comes into play. And I know you were saying how important this is for people like you to actually be able to share their work and getting things out there, because otherwise it would be, I think, really difficult for the everyday user to find out what Jon is doing in Manchester today. Oh, look, he has this pretty cool concept art for this crazy game he's just creating. Awesome. Can you imagine how things would be if we couldn't access these types of forums? It would be really, really isolating, I think.
Well, I mean, we did briefly talk about how art has developed and has come on in leaps and bounds since back in the day, but you imagine, for example, the old Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. So you imagine that's the days before Electronic Arts. That's the days before everyone had their Wacom tablets. That's the days before the art director could talk to you on a day-to-day basis across the world and see what you're doing. It would have been a case of all the artwork's hand drawn or hand painted. It's all communicated by letters or telephone. An artist probably would take a photocopy or a fax and scan it back to the art director. And then next thing you know, he's then got to do the painting, put it together, roll it, put it in a package and send it off halfway across the world. And it's just, and that's why it's developed so much in nowadays.
Absolutely. Well, I'm getting conscious of the time.
Yep.
So I think it should be time to wrap things up. We've had a very, very different conversation, a very full conversation.
It's been fun.
But I think that the way I would like to say goodbye today in a different way, Jon. And actually, I think it would be real nice if you could just what I would really like to know is which is the piece of art and part of the actual project of the after that you've enjoyed most making, at least so far. Obviously, the finished project is not done. I know this is a very difficult choice, but I really want you to just pitch that in, so then everyone that's listening to this can get that mental image, look for that, and then as soon as Kickstarter is out, then we are all gonna be backing that up just to get that one picture, because that picture, I think, is probably, you know, the sort of summary of the game, the spirit, if you like.
So I would probably go with the one that seems to get the most conversations going, and that's there's an image which is a landscape image. Basically, it just shows a typical Wyoming grass open plain with the mountains of Wind River in the background, and in the foreground you've got a guy sat on a horse who's approaching the wreckage of what looks to be some kind of military helicopter that's all rusted and looks like it's been there for decades. Sat on the helicopter waiting for him is someone who appears to be some form of Native American Indian. In the sky above, you can see the moon, but obviously something's wrong. You can see the moon's been fractured and bits are hanging off it in the sky above. And I think there's a couple of road signs, the remains of road signs, obviously telling people that this location at one time would have been a main highway going through the state of Wyoming. And that seems to get the most comments, basically, and most people interested.
Looking at it right now, I can see why it's quite eye-catching.
It is. It is beautiful.
And again, I approach that from a concept art environmental piece, really. But to me, and the name of the piece is The Return of the Horse. And you know, there is a small section in the book which talks about that, because obviously, you know, The Return of the Horse basically talks about the fact that horse travel has become a big thing again. You know, it would do. You know,
of course,
So horses and riding is a big skill within the after, and that chap is obviously delivering a horse, whether it's a stolen horse or whatever, to its rightful owner, which is a Native American. There's the Wind River area, of Wyoming has got a large Native American Indian reservation on it, and you know, they're going to appear quite a lot in the book, because you know, a lot of them have relied on their ancestral skills to survive the after. They're known as the tribe within the book, so you know, there's a large section on them and their beliefs on what they'll be doing in the world.
Nice, and I can see a lot of interesting art will come from that as well. They've got some interesting visual things to contribute.
Absolutely.
But that picture that you've just described, that's it's interesting. There's obviously some sort of story going on there, and it could be any of several things happening. So it's gets you thinking about the setting.
Absolutely. I think that picture, I'm glad you've picked that one, because I was hoping you would, because to me it was really intriguing, and in a way it seemed quite emotional, I think. There is almost like a bittersweetness to it. I don't know, maybe I'm just making that up. I'm melancholy.
Well, that feels like the whole tone of the game. So
absolutely.
Captures that quite well.
I think that's the reason why that was the one I had in my head, and I wanted to know which one it was for you, because I thought that was, you know, really what got me, you know. That was one of the things I was like,
because it basically shows the remains of what was, but it's not affecting the life. You've still got the animal, the bird life. You've got people surviving, gone
the
back
skies
to the
full
old
of birds.
ways.
It's lovely.
It's absolutely great. Well, I think all that's left to say is that you guys should be really, really, really keeping this image fixed in your head and really working your way towards the Kickstarter and craft wonderful stories from this image and from Jon's work. So thank you, Jon, so much for joining us today.
It's been great.
We're really glad, despite all of the technical issues that none of you are ever going to hear because they're going to end up in the background.
We'll see.
But thank you so much for this. Best of luck in the last, sort of weeks of the project, and we will be supporting your Kickstarter all the way. So have a good night, everybody, and we'll be coming back with some more.
Okay, thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.